Joining us now for Word Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Rubin. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Okay, let's get straight into our global brief. We'll start, of course, with former President Trump. He's made his appearance at the Republican National Convention over there in Milwaukee. When he entered, it was very much... Can you say sex appeal? It was a very sexy stride he put in, and you can see he's got a very, very stoic face on. He's walking very, very confidently, and your eyes go immediately to his right ear, which has been quite obviously bandaged. I mean, I wouldn't say this is for dramatics. We all saw that it was bleeding as he left the stage on Saturday American time and early on Sunday after this assassination attempt. So him walking in to a crowd of people shouting fight, chanting fight, fight, fight. It was definitely a warm welcome to him. This is his first public appearance since that assassination attempt, and he didn't waste any time in making his presence felt. He's got the support of all of his family members. That's his son there. And as he took to the stage, we are going to be heavily anticipating his actual speech. That he's going to be giving this formal speech on Thursday, but he did say you've got the fist going again there. But he did say that he has changed the wording of his speech, and it will be interesting to hear now what he is going to be talking about in light of what he has survived just some 48 hours ago. We also know that this is the time where he has announced his pick as his running mate. He has chosen J.D. Vance, who's a 39-year-old first-time senator out of Ohio. It's worth noting that J.D. Vance was definitely not a fan of Trump in his earlier days in politics. He's commonly being referred to as a never Trumper. And he also is someone who referred to former President Donald Trump as an American Hitler. So to see this crossover, to have the two joining forces in this way, it's going to be quite interesting. He is, of course, very young, some 40 years Donald Trump's junior, but he is also Yale educated. He is a venture capitalist. He's written a memoir turned into a film looking at the socioeconomic background of his own. He's often been referred to as a hillbilly. I don't know how accurate that is, but it is very, very interesting to see that someone who was definitely on the other side of debate when it comes to President Trump be picked as his running mate. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say, listen to what he has to say thereafter. Lastly, looking at our American outlook on this global brief this morning, President Joe Biden did sit down with Lester Holt yesterday in that interview, and I think the interview itself was a strong image of a president still in this fight. He's reiterated many times, Rufai, I'm not going to look at you. He's reiterated many, many times that he is not going to pull out of this race, that he is dedicated to running. And of course, he took the opportunity to extend his well wishes out to Donald Trump again. He talked about their call in the immediate aftermath of the assassination attempt. He also talks about how he feels as though there's definitely going to be a need for a cooling of the political temperature. But he didn't hold any punches when it came to talking about President Trump himself and the threats that he poses to American democracy, and that he has also contributed to the violence that they are condemning now. When we are talking about violence, it doesn't just start about what happened over the weekend. We also have to look at January 6th insurrection and how Donald Trump played a role in that. Let's take a listen to a clip from this interview, though.
You appeared to be confused.
Lester, look. Why don't you guys ever talk about the 28 lies he told? Where are you on this? Why didn't the press ever talk about that? 28 times it's confirmed he lied in that debate. I had a bad night. I wasn't feeling well at all. And I had been, I screwed up. But
I just asked the question because the idea that you may or may not have seen what some of these other folks have seen, you're not on the same...
I'd have to see, I was there. I'd have to see it, I was there. And by the way, seriously, you won't answer the question, but why didn't the press talk about all the lies he told? Well, I didn't know anything about that.
We have reported many of the issues that came up during that debate.
No, you haven't.
We'll provide you with them.
God love you.
God love you.
I mean, did you hear that? He made it very clear. You guys always want to talk about my physical strength, or you want to criticize me for this and that, but why don't you condemn the lies being told? Yeah. 28 of them, and that's the whole said, well, we do report on them. And he said, no, you don't. So there's definitely, if anything, if people are looking at examples of Joe Biden showing some strength, he was definitely throwing some blows and tussling there in that interview. So I don't think that it was a terrible interview. I do think that many eyes may have shifted from Biden to, of course, Trump in light of what happened over the weekend. But as someone who watched that interview, I do think that he held his own. Rufai, what do you think?
So for me, largely coherent as always. I mean, you can try as much as possible to put this PR spin on Biden. Two things, his age, equity problems are there. Yeah, no stutters this time around, no stumbles this time around, but largely incoherent. But I like the fact that he took the fight to Biden, to Trump here. And what Biden pretty much was saying is that you are the purveyor of violence, Trump. You started all of this. And yes. And he was asked a very critical question. He said he didn't want to run in the last elections.
Right. But he chose to.
He chose to after he saw Trump's reaction to what happened in Charleston, where you saw fundamentalists hurting people and you, Trump, you were in support of that. There were some fine people across board. So you are the greatest purveyor of violence, not to justify what happened to you, which is sad and highly condemnable, but you are the one that led your country to the slaughter slop with an insurrection because you couldn't accept an election result. Also, he was asked about the Supreme Court and the decision yesterday, which is a very sad one, as regards the document case in Mar-a-Lago, that the lawyers have now kicked out because the council, they said, oh, it was an illegal council and all of that.
That his appointment very
shady and all of that. And that's the effect of the Supreme Court, because since the Supreme Court had upheld that immunity clause and they can't speak together as one voice because he put most of the judges there anyway, conservative judges, then you've started to see the problems happen. So it's a trickle down. So this week he's won a lot of legal, victories.
I mean, the Department of Justice have given clearance for an appeal to be filed.
So an appeal has to be filed. An appeal has to be filed because this cannot continue. And, he spoke about a lot of things. And it's indeed correct. When Lester Holt was trying to press him that, you said it's an existential threat to democracy. Yes, Trump is an existential threat to democracy. Over the weekend, I took my time to read close to 900 pages of the Heritage Foundation 2025 project. I fear for America. I'm a Christian, but I don't support Christian nationalism. It's not the way to go in any country. You can't divide the country. The Christian nationalism plot in the Heritage 2025 document it's going to divide America.
All right. Okay, so very quickly, rightly said, I want to say that, first of all, kudos that, and you must salute the bravery of President Joe Biden to sit in for interviews despite his bashing following that debate with former President Donald Trump. One of the things that have come out from this strongly is that even though a number of people would say it's come out a bit late, that they are now taking the fight back to Trump and taking the attention away from his age and capacity to the fact that look at the option. Look at the other. Look at Trump. He mentioned the number of lies and even challenged the media for not focusing on that.
They did focus on that.
And some did. CNN, on the day CNN didn't. They didn't challenge him.
They fact-checked him.
On the day, it was after the debate that they fact-checked him that they then released the full document to fact-check him. And a number of people criticized that because ordinarily they would immediately say that, in the moment say that that's actually wrong, that's not. But I believe they were just being careful so that they wouldn't be seen to be partisan or to be taking sides. Then beyond that, in terms of just analyzing the choice for Vance, like you said, Vance is 39 years old, young man, and a number of appeals. When Trump chose Mike Pence as vice, it was because of his appeal to the evangelical Christians. At that time, he needed to strengthen his base because a number of them were still quite skeptical because of his own personal life. But now he's found a man who is, like in your words, hillbilly, a man who can appeal to the middle belt regions which he has to strengthen base and hopefully win. That could be a game changer in his elections. And of course, one who said he's come from very low beginnings and built himself up. And just the American dream, I believe. But how they'll work together, I don't know. But at the end of the day, it just shows that in politics, there are no permanent enemies, just permanent interests.
Okay, from the point of view of strategy, it was the interview with Leslie Holt was counter-programming against the Milwaukee, Wisconsin convention of the Republican Party. And he used that occasion, to get himself back into the game. What are the key things he said? On the question of age, he was very clear. He said, look, he's just 3 years older than Trump. and that his mental acuity, number two, he said, is still very sharp. Two, he made a point about, a phone call to donors that he had a few days before Trump was shot, when he said we should put Trump in bullseye.
Yes.
He clarified that. He said, well, it was a mistake to have used the expression bullseye, but what he meant is that America needs to focus on, Trump, what he says, what he does, his many lies. And it was within that context that he talked about how, the media is paying disproportionate attention to his own age, his gaffes, rather than to the many lies that Donald Trump has been telling. And then he made a point about the fact that he's not going to drop out of the race. I think that's also important. He said, listen, 1.4 million people voted for me to be the presumptive candidate of the Democratic Party. Okay, he asked. I will listen to them. So he used that. Those are the major takeaways from that interview. And then, of course, J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, before I went to the U.S. to live there to do a program at the University of Maryland, I used to call it Ohio.
We've all learned how to mispronounce words. We'll get to them.
Don't use that to cover up.
No. I'm saying that we've all had our challenges.
I've since been better educated as Ohio. Okay, I got it right.
You did.
But in any case, he said, look, Trump has picked J.D. Vance because he likes people around him who will do whatever he says and listen to everything that he says. But the main criticism is J.D. Vance, 39 years old, is an extreme right-winger who's committed to the project of Make America Great Again, and that, in fact, is likely to be worse than Trump. And the Democrats are saying that Americans should beware, because the combination of Trump and J.D. Vance, they are going to cut taxes for the wealthy, increase taxes for the middle class, and create an economy. But what is the truth? The truth is that corporate America is beginning to support that ticket, because they think that the Trump economy will be very good for trade in America. So this is where we are. Trump has been confirmed, he has been coronated, he has been crowned as the Republican candidate. Well, I think that President Biden expects the same thing. He says it's just a 3-year difference, and his mental acuity is sharp. But it's for Americans to decide.
It is.
It's not what we think in Nigeria.
Well, this election continues to heat up. Well, let's move on to some news headlines across the world. We'll begin, of course, in Nigeria with This Day newspaper. The front cover of This Day newspaper looks at reassurance from different entities, the Central Bank of Nigeria, the NNPCL, talking about how they believe Nigeria's economy will pick up soon. This is after a conversation they had with the Finance Committee of the National Assembly just yesterday. And in addition to that, you did have the NNPC discuss, as you've already discussed on the morning show, that the Port Harcourt, that's one word that I'm struggling with. You were struggling with Ohio. Port Harcourt sometimes it jumps in and out of the tongue. But they talked about that refinery, ship production. Port Harcourt.
Yeah, Port Harcourt.
But are you pronouncing the H or not?
Port Harcourt.
Port Harcourt. Port Harcourt. I feel like sometimes we don't pronounce the H.
Pitakwa.
Port
Harcourt.
There's that too. Let me not offend anybody. But that refinery should be opening at the early part of next month. So that's the first story that we're taking on This Day. Moving on from This Day, we'll take a look at the New Telegraph. And the New Telegraph, very interestingly, is looking at private education and how there are struggles there in that sector of the education ministry here in Nigeria. Essentially, 30% of pupils are now being sent home because of inability to pay school fees. And then when we're talking about payment of fees, the institutions themselves are also complaining about the heavy rate of taxes that they have to pay, often to local government, or often to government. So that is the situation that we're seeing. Lots of continuing articles on every sector of society in Nigeria being squeezed, having to pay more for less. And here we're seeing one of the ramifications of those high costs, which are people being unable to continue their education, which will definitely create a gap that they don't need. So moving on from the New Telegraph, let's take a look at The Guardian. The Guardian has a really in-depth analysis on food inflation. What they've done is take a look at, firstly, the numbers of food inflation from the end of the first quarter to the end of the second one, but also looking at the fluctuations in food inflation from May. There it says food inflation hit 40.66% in May and then went up to 40.87% in June. So clearly this is an upward trajectory on food prices. And they've also done a really easy to understand diagram of different foodstuffs that have been, vulnerable to these price increases. So for example, they're looking at 5 tubes of yam and how that's gone from 10,000 naira to 22,000 naira, an increase of 120%. They also look at beans, for example, and they talk about bananas, spinach, bananas, a bunch of bananas. They say the price has gone up 61% from 2,800 naira to 4,000 naira. And I know that for many people, myself included, when you go to the supermarket, it's actually, I constantly am transferring prices from one currency to the other just to look at the fluctuations. And some of them are very, very scary. So I can't imagine how this difficulty is going to continue without any type of focus on there. Staying on the topic of food, we'll go to the Daily Independent next. And they're talking about how the federal government is planning to tackle hunger by giving 20 trucks of rice to each state and the FCT. I know that you all were discussing this, and I know you'll remember back during COVID-19 palliative days when I was in the field and looking at the disbursement of these palliatives. Oftentimes, the theory of how they want to disperse these packets didn't really match up in practice. So instead of people waiting for certain wards to get the food to them, they would come out to the warehouses. And then there's also the controversy of warehouses stashing food spoiling, certain government leaders holding on to and hoarding food instead of giving it out to the people. So we're hoping that this won't be repeated this time. But also, there has been quite a lot of recent history and people saying that perhaps we have to focus on how we can solve this holistically. Mr. Adesina at the African Development Bank, I don't know why his first name is running from me, Akinwumi Adesina. He said that while he can welcome the federal government's efforts, he said that you cannot... Sorry? Dr. Akinwumi Adesina said that no matter what happens, we cannot import food faster than the rate of inflation. So you have to have a real targeted solution. So moving on from the Daily Independent, let's take a look at the Daily Trust, and they're looking at insecurity. Daily Trust says that bandits have killed 5 people and abducted 15, including a newborn baby in Zamfara State. And so that just, again, echoes the state of insecurity across this country. But of course, this article is looking at Zamfara State in particular. And then there's also a mention of the United Arab Emirates lifting its ban on Nigerian passport holders. There's been a lot of back and forth in between us. So the latest that we've got with the UAE is that they have lifted the ban on Nigerian passport holders. And then lastly, let's take a look at the Vanguard. The Vanguard is looking at how manufacturers are rejecting the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics figures when it comes to inflation. They put out that 34.19% inflation rate, and they don't accept it. They rejected that. So those are our Nigerian papers. Before we go on to our African ones.
So I want to piggyback on that. I've always also rejected it. In fact, there's a guy called Steve Hanke that calculates the inflation numbers of Nigeria. When the inflation numbers came out at 34.1% yesterday, what Steve Hanke was saying that by his calculations, actually 107%.
Right.
So I totally reject it, because in the last 2 months, between May to this time, I've seen price of fruit trickle way over 50% for some food items. It's crazy. Bananas, dragon fruit. Dragon fruit even saddens me the most because I eat a lot of dragon fruit.
You've got expensive taste, Rufai. That's a very expensive fruit, an exotic fruit.
Jesus Christ.
They're selling pomegranates for 20,000 naira.
Can you imagine the way it's increased? So that's how sad things are. When they're saying it's 34, I think it doesn't reflect what is really happening as regards inflation. Please.
Tuber of yam, 7,000 naira.
Yes.
I've switched to sweet potatoes. I think they're nice.
That's even healthier.
Yeah, it's healthier. A number of people have substituted. I know one of the things about Nigerians who have eyes are the way we adapt very easily. But I think even being able to adapt is now, we're being stretched thin at that. But let me very quickly speak about the UAE lifting of the, and encouraging Nigerians to come. But the process has become more stringent. And so even though people are celebrating that, how many people can afford at this rate with the stringent conditions? We're almost out of time. But just to say that, I don't see the reason for celebration yet. I don't think we have a fair deal yet in terms of the UAE deal. It is still almost impossible now for every other person to travel anymore. But, well, I don't know how that's going to work out.
Well, I mean, I'm hearing that you are running out of time.
And I cannot hear a thing, so I'm being guided by the two of you.
Just to make the quick point.
Sure.
These 740 trucks that have been distributed across the states, and the additional bags of rice that senators and House of Reps members will collect, well, I don't see how it will solve the food crisis. Nor do I see how, the importation of food will solve the food crisis problem in Nigeria on a sustainable basis. Akinwumi Adesina has a PhD from Purdue University in agric economics. He's been in charge of IFA, the FAO, all of that. So he knows the subject. He's been Minister of Agriculture. There are other fundamental issues. Inputs within the agricultural value chain. Access to finance, access to land, security. These are some of the basic issues that the Nigerian government will have to deal with on a sustainable basis. Now, they've been talking about distribution of fertilizers also. I hope those bags of fertilizers will not be converted to a source of income for politicians. So these are the things we need to worry about. But the Minister of Agri tells us he will give us the framework within 2 weeks. When we see the details, we can relate instead of these episodic reports of distribution of rice, distribution of fertilizer. When we see that plan, then we'll be in a better position to interrogate it.
All right, well, we're totally out of time. Thank you so much, Adefemi. Always good to see you.